We imagine a brutal winter, thousands of freezing soldiers and a powerful army trapped with no escape. This is the story of the Battle of Berezina, a deadly clash where Napoleon's dream of conquering Russia turned into a bitter nightmare. In November 1812, along the icy banks of the Berezina River, one of the most devastating retreats in military history reached its breaking point. Join us as we dive into the dramatic events that forced Napoleon's Grande Armée to fight for survival. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-proclaimed Emperor of the French, embarked on one of the most ambitious military campaigns in history, the invasion of Russia. With an army of over 600,000 men, the Grande Armée was the largest force Europe had ever seen, sweeping through the Russian plains with unmatched confidence. Napoleon believed his superior tactics and organization would bring Russia to its knees, but he was about to face challenges beyond his control. Napoleon's objective was to force Tsar Alexander I of Russia to accept his dominance in Europe. But as the Grande Armée advanced, the Russian forces under commanders like General Kutuzov refused to engage in open battle. Instead, they retreated, drawing Napoleon's forces deeper into the vast Russian landscape. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow in September 1812, his army was exhausted. But instead of finding a city ready to surrender, he found it abandoned and burning. The Russians had sacrificed their own capital to deny Napoleon the victory he sought. Without supplies or shelter, Napoleon had no choice but to begin the long and deadly retreat back to France. As winter set in, temperatures dropped, and the Grande Armée was ill-prepared for the Russian cold. Men froze in their sleep, horses died by the thousands, and supplies dwindled. The army that had once marched proudly was now reduced to a disorganized, starving, and freezing horde. The Russian army, now in pursuit, launched harassing attacks, adding to the suffering of the French. Despite these brutal conditions, Napoleon continued to push his men toward the safety of the western border. But one last obstacle lay in their path: the icy, treacherous Berezina River. By late November, Napoleon's army reached the banks of the Berezina River, only to find it swollen and icy. To make matters worse, Russian forces were converging on both sides. The French were now trapped, with 40,000 soldiers facing destruction unless they could somehow cross the freezing river. Desperate, Napoleon ordered engineers to build makeshift bridges across the Berezina. Under the command of General Ebler, the engineers braved freezing waters and enemy fire to construct two bridges using whatever materials they could find. They knew failure would mean death for themselves and their fellow soldiers. As the bridges were completed, panic set in among the French forces. Soldiers and civilians alike scrambled to cross, and chaos ensued. The riverbanks became a scene of utter horror, with men trampling each other in their desperation to escape the Russian forces closing in from both sides. Russian forces, aware of Napoleon's dire situation, launched an all-out assault on the French troops at the crossing. Russian artillery bombarded the bridges, and soldiers charged at the French positions along the riverbanks. The French rear guard fought valiantly to hold them back, buying precious time for the rest of the army to cross. The French rear guard, composed of brave units willing to sacrifice themselves, held off the Russian advance with fierce determination. Men like Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's most loyal generals, led the defense. With muskets firing and bayonets flashing, they fought until they were overwhelmed, knowing they would likely never see France again. Those who made it across the Berezina were met with further horrors. The cold and hunger that had plagued them throughout the retreat grew even more severe. The river crossing was a scene of unimaginable tragedy. Bodies lay frozen in the ice, and supplies were abandoned in the snow. Soldiers were forced to leave behind wounded comrades, and civilians perished alongside them. Of the roughly 40,000 soldiers who had reached the Berezina, only about half made it across. The rest were killed, captured, or left behind, a grim reminder of the cost of Napoleon's ambitions. By the time Napoleon's forces limped back into friendly territory, The Grande Armée was a shadow of its former self. Of the 600,000 men who had marched into Russia, only a few thousand remained. The Russian campaign marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon, whose empire would unravel in the years that followed. For Napoleon, the disaster at Berezina shattered the myth of his invincibility. Europe now saw that the once unbeatable Grande Armée could be defeated, and the tide began to turn against the French Empire. For the men who survived, the horrors of the Berezina would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Battle of Berezina has become a lasting symbol of the brutality of war and the limits of human endurance. For Russia, it was a triumph, a testament to the strength of the Russian winter and the resilience of its people. For France, it was a painful reminder of the cost of conquest and the harsh realities of warfare. Today, the term Berezina in French has come to signify catastrophe, a nod to the sheer scale of loss suffered there. The courage of those who fought and fell along the Berezina is remembered as a testament to both the horrors of war and the spirit of those who endure. From the blazing summer of 1812 to the frozen hell of the Berezina, Napoleon's Russian campaign remains one of history's greatest cautionary tales. It was a campaign of ambition, hubris, and bitter regret, where thousands paid the ultimate price for an empire's dreams. Today, as we remember the fallen, the tragedy of the Berezina serves as a haunting reminder of the price of war and the resilience of the human spirit. If you found this journey into history compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what historical battles or moments you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching The World in Focus. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that shape our past.